Most of you know that our house has been visited recently by loss. Our only child died less than 3 weeks ago. But I am a warrior, and I know how, because of my past life, to bury my dead, saddle up, and move on. And this is moving on, and my son would want me to do that. I absolutely know that. And one of the things that I taught my son was that life is brief, have a good time. And he learned that lesson, and he did have a good time. I want to thank Joan and the River Road Park and Rec for hosting this event. If it were not for River Road Park and Rec, my husband and I would never have met. We were lifeguards at the swimming pool overhead. So our son Patrick was just a gleam in our eyes at that point. And things happen in life that you don't know the reason of sometimes. And just a few days before our son died, I was sitting with him in the bleachers to watch one of his sons playing basketball. And I had written some time ago, just shortly, not too long ago, a poem about him, and I'd never really written a poem about my son specifically before. And so I handed him this poem, and he looked at me with that look like kids give you, like, oh, geez, Mom, you're writing a poem about me. And he read it, and he liked it, and he put it in his pocket. So I brought that short poem with me today, and there's about 20 copies on the back table if you'd like to look at it. And it's called Lackadaisical, and the word lackadaisical comes from Old English word lackaday. Lackadaisical. The boy swore he would never become a slacker, a man who others looked down on for his languorous grip on a working life. The boy's father used the word often, referring to the slackers on his crew, men who let others hoist and carry the burden. The disdain in his weary voice impressed the boy into effort above and beyond. Never would he become a dreaded slacker. Be the boss, be quick, be sturdy, be a real man. Those were his bright stars, and he reached to the sky, climbing, jetting off as the plane's chief pilot. Speed and exactness, no slacker, no lackaday. Yeah. For Patrick, he was a pilot, and he was a jet pilot, and he had just received his 5th rating, which most pilots don't have ratings for 5 different kinds of jets, and he enjoyed flying. This poem was written about 20 years ago, and I'm now having to read my own poetry. I'm not able to write yet, but I'm sure I will be at some point. And this was written for my best friend on the coast, who lost 2 of her children within 10 months of each other. Her 13-year-old daughter killed by a drunk driver, and 10 months later, her 27-year-old son was electrocuted in a logging accident in Alaska. And this I wrote for her daughter. And it actually won, I think it was 1st place in the state poetry contest that year. Understanding November. Sarah Jane died a little past 9 on a Sunday evening. Her name was old, an homage to deceased grandmothers, but Sarah Jane was young, a shimmering bud of teenage beauty. In November, she wavered between 13 and 14, where children fall away from the body of a woman. But against asphalt and concrete, the grinding metal of a drunk driver disemboweled Sarah Jane from life. And then there was the phone call. I doubted my capacity to hear. The funeral was supposed to be goodbye. Winter months passed. Now April has arrived. She would be 14 on Friday. Thin blades of grass grow where shovels and a backhoe carved the injustice of early winter into soft cemetery ground. I watch the grass come back. It will never be enough, but spring is all there is. And that's how I feel right now, is spring is all there is. Can you hear me? Yes. Am I doing okay with this microphone? Yes. Okay. This is called Returning on a Plane. My flight arrives from the south. I look down at the town where I grew up, the town where death came too often, stealing my people, blurring my view of what is fair and bearable. At the end of each May, wearing a Girl Scout uniform, I stood on the bridge crossing the South Coast Fork River and dropped peony and rose petals for the war dead. On Cemetery Hill, my child hands placed flower stalks for a long-gone father, a dead infant, a drowned cousin, the heart attack and stroke grandparents, and my cardio death 40-ish uncles. I never cried. Darkness seeped from every corner. I clung to the red bricks and raw studs of my childhood house, struggling to keep life's fire and wind from sweeping me away. Looking down at my hometown from this plane, the place appears innocent and blameless. This is a poem I wrote this year, and it's called Blues Imagined, Not Sung. One of my favorite bands was Concrete Love Seat, which broke up this year, so I keep lobbying them to get back together. I'm not making much progress. A bruised sky moans to the barren riverbank. Crows pinch air in alto. Charcoal clouds scud above winter apples, desiccated by rot. Still they hang, red and brave, against this cold day. Feed me something warm, feed me, a tale of love, a young face rising, memory erased, fresh for impression. Feed me something warm, feed me, the aroma of a familiar body, a handprint grained for match. Feed me something warm, feed me, a memorized tune laden with childhood cargo. Feed me something warm. This is one of my husband's favorite poems, so I told him I would read it, called Falling Into. The falling keeps going, the falling in love, falling out of love, the falling off the wagon or the straight and narrow, falling into fortune and falling for the wrong person. Falling excuses the doer a bit. After all, how can a mere person stop the falling curtain of fate? A fallen woman marries a man with fallen arches, and they both escape a fall from grace. This is how the world works, with dizzy swoons and falling stars pressing mortals into awkward action. We are all fallen angels, elbowed out of heaven. Since we fell, we keep a wary eye on the coming of that final nightfall, at the lip of our last winter, after the colorful fall season has exhausted life. My husband's parents lived in Montana for a few decades, so I've spent a lot of time over there. This is called the Berkeley Pit. Montana is a place of fist and elbows. Folded canyons drain the fractured mountains and yellowed plains. People with crude manners fit in and somehow get ahead. Vast beauty meets the horizon. To the eye of a snow goose high in the Montana sky, the mountain lake looks like a place to rest, but it's toxic, a killer for birds. Feathered corpses stack up. The easy copper ore is gone. Butte is played out, wearing yesterday's coat of paint. Massive mine trucks and big money moved on. Slow agony spreads in Butte as the great hole fills with poisonous water. The pit will overflow and taint the groundwater that people and animals drink. Only the snow goose doesn't know better. Now, many of you who have read my book, Diesel Horse, I hope you'll come back for the second book along that line, are acquainted with a family that I have known for years on the Oregon coast, and many of them are in Northern California. They're pretty rough characters, but they make for wonderful little short story poems. And somebody asked me if I'd bring a couple today, so I brought a couple out of the newest manuscript that is being reviewed. This is called Family Reunion. The oldest son offers the trailer of an old freight hauler for shelter. He tugs down the metal roller door to keep out mosquitoes. Everyone knows he wishes they hadn't come. At least he's rid of the prostitute he's been living with. That gal got busted for selling cigarettes minus tax. ATF agents photographed her outside a bar, beside a car, like she was some kind of terrorist. No food in that freight box for a family that likes eating. The surviving daughter, a sturdy religious woman, makes sandwiches out of what she finds in her car. After dark, the second grandson comes near their fire. He won't look square at anyone, knowing they'd see his addiction. Just keeps to the shadows. They laugh over past stunts, clean boys in Sunday clothes, their late brother shouting down the Salvation Army church chimney during the service, pretending he was the Lord. Those boys. Some of you may have heard this before. I know I have read it. It's called Pirate Fisherman. And this guy he's the real McCoy. She slipped the news in between her daughter's separation and the sleet, how her ex-husband, who left her with 4 kids, has voice box cancer. 50 years of tobacco and whiskey. He never paid child support or bought her groceries. He had better places for his summer salmon money. This flawed man may deserve to die, but he'll survive. She said he asked her if she'd care for him. She will. She's an angel. Any man who fishes his boat in the Pacific, a place where his brother and 3 nephews went down in over 100 fathoms, well, that man is not easy to kill. Cancer will have to match his poker skills. That uncanny way he has of talking other men out of whatever a gambling fellow has to offer. He's slick, a chip off the family block, a credit to legions of pirates in harbor cafes. He even tried Pine Forest, anywhere with a bar and card players. He was drunk when he crashed his car, yet crawled up a steep bank on a snowy pass in Montana, his ankle broken to the point that surgery and medical know-how couldn't get the thing to heal. So he said, cut it off. The prosthesis the VA provided wasn't dependable on a wet boat deck. He carved his own wooden leg. Not all peg legs are characters in books. Some drive a used Cadillac with crab pots and 1 dress shoe in the back window and pontificate about the cost of living as if they were ever an honest-to-God provider. Pirates make you watch them, even when you don't want to. They'll cut cards for title to a boat, but have little respect for death or taxes. That guy is now in the Philippines, married to another wife and planning to be, I think it was a banana plantation pioneer or something. So it'll be interesting, the next story. This one is a hard one, and I apologize ahead of time if it's difficult to listen to. But this was the poem that I broke into Red Sofa Poets with, and it definitely wasn't neutral, and they did not kick me out on the first time. So it's called Ringworm People, and it's about this same family. Their rented single-wide doesn't have a fitting back door or kitchen water. 5 kids and even more animals. Food and transportation are hard to find, and locating a grown-up among the adults. The baby burns himself on the heater. When the 10-year-old forgets to watch, gets busy outside, listening at the wall of a neighboring trailer where a couple is loudly fucking, the kids try it, at least the oldest boy and his cousin. She's 7, can't read, and has ringworm from her knees to her skinny little butt. Someone gets medicine from a clinic, but no one remembers to tend the angry red circles creeping closer to that young crotch. Because the mother is busy flirting with her next lover. The father works sometimes and hasn't left yet. A neighbor supplies the mother with beer. She can't afford more than occasional meth. The kids go to school if someone wakes up before the bus comes or their current crop of lice haven't begun to show. When a deputy arrives, he takes away the oldest boy. The kid is 11, and everyone agrees he should have known that dry humping a 7-year-old, one with a big mouth, was a really stupid kid crime. And these places do exist in our country, where people can turn a blind eye to almost anything. Just remember that if you see children or women who need help, speak up. This one was written about Coos Bay. It's called Survival. The list of supplies runs in the local newspaper. Warnings repeat on TV. We are supposed to prep for the big one, the mother of all earthquakes. In this huddle of bayside shacks known as the Crab Flats, we'll have less than 7 minutes to race for high ground before a swarm of tsunamis repeat the Japanese killer wave scene. We own flashlights and shoes, but no one here has extra cash to stockpile food and water if we should be lucky and survive. Our critters better run with us. As far as the marauders, the news article claims will come, we say, what are they going to steal? Crab flatters don't have much, but we're familiar with buck knives and unregistered guns. The Crab Flats are an area in Coos Bay on the way to Charleston that the level of the water and all the septic tanks, when my son was in elementary school, there were a lot of hepatitis cases because of the water, the septic tanks, the poverty. There's a lot of poverty in Coos County. This is a poem from Blue Cat Shoes, a book I did a few years back after these shoes that I have on. If you haven't noticed the shoes, I always wear my poetry shoes. They were made by a man in Texas. He painted them, cut them, and sewed them. And I found them when he was selling them in Albuquerque, so I bought a pair. And this is a strange little book. I don't know how I've ever felt about it. I fell in love with my book Diesel Horse right away, but I've had a harder time with Blue Cat Shoes, but we'll see. I picked one poem out of it to read called State Fair. I know what he is thinking. I once fell for a buffalo, picked out a name and traveled to Montana to study their huge faces. Now a miniature donkey named Spotty is tied to a gate at the state fair with an asking price of $500. I mention our 20 acres, the lenient CC&R rules. I've come to watch draft horses muscle wagons, harnesses jingle, but just outside the arena waits the small donkey. We both know Spotty isn't coming with us in a Ford Explorer. To a hill with a view where a ghost buffalo roams and cowgirl dreams wrangle and jangle in an old woman's head. This poem, I'm getting almost wrapping up here, is an exercise that we did in Red Sofa, my poetry group. And I can't even remember the exact prompt, but it's called Location, 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 after the real estate phrase. Rats don't live in pianos unless they have secured a C60-75 exemption from the Office of Lodging and Musical Development. It takes a couple of years for clearance to build on the treble clef. Forget any dream of nesting on the bass clef ivories unless you are a king rat with a gazillion-dollar corporation. And we all know how those bloodless bastards get their permits. King rats just walk all over small investor mice and the 24-hour working cockroach crowd. The latest hot trend is player pianos advertised on Craigslist. Those tiny contraptions are being converted to rat condos. Young rats in hats love the rolls of vintage music and pay a fortune to chew their way into a starter unit. King rats don't bother unless the model happens to be located over the metropolitan sewer or near a business park. in that case, tune of bliss. May the merriment of heaven move forward on the calendar. May the harmony of a tune infect the heart of us all. Thank you so much.